This session will be recorded so that if you want to share with anyone after this session is over with, we'll be sending that to you, and you can also view it from our YouTube website. So at this point, I'll let you take it over, Embry.
All right, thank you so much, Cassie, and thank you all for joining me today. So I'm going to be sharing with you some tools that I have found are really helpful for creating authentic assessment in your course. So authentic assessment, when we're thinking about it, it's really just the idea that we can make assessments that have real world context, that are relevant to students' lives, that are relevant to what they're going to be doing after they move on from their time at university. So a lot of that stems from our planning and planning. So you really have to be thinking a lot about what you want your learners to accomplish, what you want your learners to be able to do, and then how you're going to take your learners' feedback and feed that back into creating this assessment. So today's session, I've kind of just broken it down into 3 parts: planning for your authentic assessment, designing your authentic assessment, and then evaluating your authentic assessment. And at the end, I have an exemplar that I'm really excited to show you that I worked on with an instructor in the Homeland Security Department, Chad Foster. He created a really amazing authentic assessment for his students in an 8-week purely online course, fully online course, that turned out some really excellent products and some really great feedback from students. So just diving straight into planning for, or I guess our objectives today. Instructional designer like to always try to start with objectives. So what I'm hoping by the end of this session that you feel confident in creating authentic assessments by articulating those learning objectives, starting with those learning objectives, and designing tasks that integrate higher order thinking skills and real life contexts that you're going to be able to evaluate through transparent evaluation criteria. So I feel like a really essential part of a successful authentic assessment comes from rubrics and establishing that evaluation criteria upfront for both yourself and your learner. I feel like a lot of times when I'm talking with instructors and we're talking about what kind of assessments they want to plan for their course, something that is high on their priority list and high top of mind for them is, how long is this going to take me to grade and give feedback? And I totally understand those concerns. That makes perfect sense. Like when you're designing an assessment, you know, at the end of the day, I'm the one that's going to be grading these assessments, looking over these, and I'm the one that's going to have to be offering feedback. And you want that feedback to be authentic. You want that feedback to be genuine, and you want that feedback to be thoughtful. So I think that that really starts with your criteria that you set at the beginning of the assessment for your learners. And in fact, you can even set, criteria through phases, right? And we're going to talk about that when we get into the designing part of this. So number 2 is design for learner engagement and reflection with tasks that are inherently motivating, relevant to learners' lives, and incorporate elements fostering self-reflection. So another really essential piece of authentic assessment is the reflection part, the end part. What did they learn from creating this product or this performance? So definitely engaging students with that inherently motivating content. So again, I work a lot with online courses and purely online courses, and it can get really easy to fall into a pattern of have students read this, have students watch this, have students take a multiple choice or matching or fill in the blank exam. And those things can be relevant, right? We need those kinds of assessments and we need those kinds of assessment tools. But ultimately, we know that students are motivated when the content is highly relevant to their lives. Okay, objectives 3 and 4, design inclusive and accessible assessments. That's just a really short, easy one. We need to make sure our assessments are accessible, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And then be able to reflect and implement change on feedback from your learners. So once you've implemented your assessment, are you able to get feedback from your learners? How are you going to collect that feedback? And then what are you going to do based on that feedback? So when you're planning your authentic assessment, the first thing you need to do is define the context. So decide, what am I assessing with this? Where does this fall into the context of the course that I'm teaching? And is an authentic assessment necessary to achieve the goals that I've laid out for my students? So at the end of this, you will receive an email. I'm not sure when it goes out, maybe tomorrow, maybe later, with this presentation and all of the links in it. So I have all kinds of tools and resources in here for you to refer back to. Don't feel like you need to try to keep track of where I'm going now, because you'll get all these links. So this first link is to kind of just the idea of, when is a traditional online test relevant and contextual versus when is an authentic assessment relevant. So I think that sometimes we might feel pressure to like, oh, I need to have all my assessments be super genuine and super authentic, but that's, again, just not possible. I think sometimes it's appropriate for students to want to assess their knowledge of the facts of whatever you're teaching. The authentic assessment is what comes in when you want your students to actually demonstrate the skills that they have picked up based on that knowledge. So this is just a quick little reference sheet about kind of when are online, like traditional tests, relevant, and when are authentic assessments relevant. You're really having students do a lot more construction, a lot more creating, a lot more analysis in that authentic assessment category, whereas you're having students do kind of more, hey, here is what I know. And again, when you're thinking about grading, sometimes some things need to be assessed in a more traditional way than with an authentic assessment. All right, let me hop back over to my presentation. Okay, establishing relevance. So these are a couple of the tools that I really love and wanted to share with you. So this first one is types of authentic assessments. So this is a great website to go. This is from the University of Chicago. These are the different types of authentic assessments that you can be thinking about and coming to this website when you are planning. So inquiry-based learning. This is when students have a problem and you're having them engage with that problem, explore with that problem, maybe make a hypothesis, and then tell you about what happened based on their experimentation. I love this 5E model: engagement phase, exploration phase, explanation phase, elaboration phase, evaluation phase. I think these types of frameworks, when you're thinking about planning your assessments, can be really helpful for really scaffolding. So I think that this would be a great way to scaffold an inquiry-based assessment of kind of breaking it down into these 5 categories and presenting it to your students as such. Problem-based learning, we've talked a lot, you've probably thought a lot about problem-based learning. You're bringing a problem from your specific field or bringing a problem that students are going to need to demonstrate their skills to solve, and you're having them work on that problem. Scenario-based learning. This is one that I see is really popular, especially in online courses, of giving students a scenario where they are professional and they need to bring their professional grade skills to that scenario. The more realistic, the more relevant, the more like current moment in time that you can make that, the better. And the exemplar that I'm going to talk about later in this presentation is a scenario-based activity. Project-based, so very similar, but basically students are creating some kind of product that they're going to bring and probably present to you and to the rest of their classmates. And then design-based learning. I see this a lot too, especially in more like hands-on fields, maybe like I just designed for an AutoCAD course where the students' kind of final project was to create a portfolio of different designs that they had learned the skills for over the course of the course. So they're going to kind of create something, they're going to make a prototype, they're going to test that prototype, and then reflect and redesign. So just a good website to come to if you're trying to brainstorm, hey, what is the type of assessment that I want to create here? All right, heading back over here, integrating higher order thinking skills. So another great tool. Is this objective builder. And really, the part of this tool that I like is this first page. So it basically helps you build your objectives for the course or for the project. And it's broken down into this level of complexity. So again, when you're creating objectives, we like to start those with what we call Bloom's verbs. So verbs that students can understand. What am I going to be doing? What is my objective here? So obviously, probably not remember, understand, apply type levels in authentic assessment, but maybe there is. So I really like the way that they've given me all kinds of different ways that I can say create, right? Arrange, compose, develop, formulate, revise, write, prepare. So I love this. There's a evaluate, under evaluate. So this is just a good place to come, and when you're brainstorming, what are my learning objectives, different ways that you can say that. And I think sometimes, we're just trying to land on the right word. Sometimes I'm like, what is it that exactly that I want them to be doing here? So I like this because you can kind of just say, okay, I want them to argue. And then on the next page, you can kind of say, what is it that you want them to argue? And it's going to kind of build that objective for you. So this is really where you want to start. You want to start with defining your learning objectives. What are the goals of this assessment? What do you want students to be able to do by the end of this assessment? And the clearer and the more contextual these goals are, probably the better products that you're going to get and the easier time you're going to have helping students actually move through the assessment, through the phases of the assessment, because they know what the end goal is and you know what the end goal is. And then I have this really great worksheet as well. So this is kind of an aid, a planning aid, if you will. And obviously this is just a tool for you to use, but I found that this was really kind of covered all of the bases of what it looks like to design a really powerful, authentic assessment. So the start is learning outcomes, make sure they're measurable, describe the real world context or scenario, define the problem or task. What do students need to do? Those Bloom's level verbs. So going back to that organizer, that objective organizer, and thinking about what are my verbs that I'm going to have student do here. What does the finished product look like? So I'm going to talk about that next. But what is the final product going to be? Is it going to be a performance? Is it going to be a presentation? Is it going to be something that they've created that they are going to be discussing in a video? Is it going to be a proposal? So you're really just thinking about, in context of your subject matter and in your field, what is it that students are going to actually be doing when they leave class and go out into the working field, and giving students an opportunity to actually practice those skills. And maybe that means you're bringing an expert into your course and letting that expert speak. And maybe that's part of sort of a preliminary activity that builds into this assessment, is hearing from an expert about what their day-to-day in the field looks like, about what they're doing to move the field forward, and then kind of going from there and saying, hey, we heard this expert, this is something that they're doing on a regular basis. Let's practice. Let's practice with that. So this worksheet, we can go back to it throughout all the phases of planning this. And again, planning ahead of time makes it so much easier when you're, presenting this to students. Again, being really clear about, what does your rubric look like? What are your learning objectives? What is the scenario? What is the task? And what are students going to actually be presenting or have at the end of this assessment? All right, so once you've determined your learning objectives, you've thought about your context of your course, you've thought about what is going to be relevant in students' lives, what is going to be relevant in their field as they move forward. Now you're kind of to the part where you're like, okay, so what exactly is this task going to look like? What exactly am I going to have my students do? And this is probably the best resource that I have found on this, of what are the types of products or performances. So this has broken it down into writing pieces. So you can see there's a wide array of things here. An action plan, an agenda, a forecast, a handbook, policy, a narrative, preparing for a podcast or a podcast in and of itself, a media review, an email, an editorial. There's all kinds of things that you could be asking your students to do. And I even love these more creative ideas about like poetry, a short story, a script for a play. So really depending on what you're doing, there is a lot of different, writing activities that you could have them do based on that. And I think sometimes when we're thinking about our course and thinking about, what do I want students to do, we can kind of just get lost of like, there's so many ideas. And I really like this tool. I'm like, have it bookmarked on my bookmarks bar that I use every day of like, I'm going to come back to this. And when I'm talking with instructors about, what are they going to do? What are we going to have students do? This is such a great place to go. So writing, performances, so a demonstration, a newscast, a podcast, role playing, an interview, a training, a video presentation. So I was actually talking with Dr. Foster this morning about another authentic assessment that he's developing kind of on the fly for a course that's already in action that's going on next week. And what he's having them do is he teaches Homeland Security. So this is about like physical security. So he's having them go on a tour of Mount Vernon, George Washington Mount Vernon estate. They're going on a virtual tour. Mount Vernon has created this amazing like virtual tour opportunity. And what they're doing is analyzing that tour for physical security, like lighting, what kind of security does the Mount Vernon people have to think about as they are, bringing thousands of people into the estate every single day. And so what he's going to have them do is actually go through on that virtual tour, take screenshots of like different things that they note as they're going through as it concerns the physical security of the estate, and create a presentation on that for an interview, and then give that presentation as if they were interviewing for a job with the security team at Mount Vernon, which I think is just so smart, so relevant. They're walking away with presentation skills, with interview skills, with actual job skills of analyzing a real place in real time and thinking about what are the different security concerns that I would have if I worked for the Mount Vernon estate. He's having them analyze, a Google map, kind of an overview of the Mount Vernon estate, and then actually having them walk through that virtual tour. And we were kind of talking through what are different ways that we could have students kind of present their findings. And what we decided on was this interview format of you're going to create a presentation for an interview and then walk into that interview and tell the Mount Vernon people what you've seen about their security. So really cool one, really good idea. Products is another one. So I guess this very much depends on your course matter. But, a diagram, a physical model, a project plan, a flow chart. So different things that they can actually design and come with, a video, infographic, multimedia, timeline. So there's all kinds of different things that you could have students be working towards. So this is just a great website to go to if you're like, I got to brainstorm. I really want to think about what can I have my students do as an authentic assessment in my course. What are the kinds of skills that they need walking out of here? What is relevant to the skill set that they need walking into a real world job? So once you have the idea, now you're ready to design the task. You're ready to actually sit down, write instructions for your students, let them know what is it that they're going to be doing, how is it relevant to what they're going to be doing when they leave the classroom and go into their field. And then the next part is establishing those rubrics and sharing those rubrics. So I will tie this right into facilitating scaffolding. So I find it's better for learners and better for the instructor if you're building this assessment into the course piece by piece. So I think that there's a kind of a temptation to say like, okay, the final assessment is due the last week of course, or this assessment is due at midterm, and then kind of like maybe mention it every once in a while, but hoping that students are working on it. But I find it goes much better if you have students turn in a little piece at a time so that you can give them feedback, so that you can tell students, like, you're on the right track, you're on the wrong track. Hey, let's think about this. This is something that I'm noticing about your project. So especially when it comes to these authentic assessments where you're giving students a ton of creativity, right? They're really expressing themselves. Every student is going to approach the project differently. Checking in and having multiple established checking in points, I think, is really powerful. So that being said, a rubric for the final project, for the final product, is going to save you a lot of energy on the back end of telling students what you expect, but also grading on the front end of, you know, exactly how you're going to be grading these projects. You've already thought about it. You've already created a rubric. But I also think that you could create a rubric for each phase. So let's say that you teach an 8-week course and you have something due week 2, you have something due week 4, week 6, and week 8. You could have a rubric for each one of those phases. And that's, again, saving you that energy, that time and energy on the back end of students know exactly how they're going to be assessed. So in my exemplar, I don't think I talked about specifically how he phased the project in the exemplar, but I believe in an 8-week online course, phase 2, they were simply getting into the technology, using the technology. So they were creating a story map in ArcGIS, which EKU already had an account with ArcGIS, and they were creating this final product called a story map. So in week 2, their only tasks were to get familiar with the technology and submit the county that they were going to be giving feedback on. And then in the second phase, they needed to actually start utilizing that technology. So it was basically they needed to write an introduction, and then they needed to start building some assets into their story map. Phase 3, the story map was completely done. They've done their entire project and submitted that. And again, I think that really helped Dr. Foster see in week 6, hey, what feedback can I give to my students? So before they submit this final project, they've gotten feedback from me. And so he was kind of doing a lot of his heavy lifting in week 6 instead of the final week of the course, when life and things start to get very crazy as the term comes to a close. And then in the eighth week, what students actually did was film a video, an executive summary of the project that they had created. So they were actually just doing a reflection over what they had already submitted in week 6, which again, I think gave the students, extra time to think about, how can I make this just a little bit better, implement Dr. Foster's feedback, and reflect on the project and what they had learned. So I think breaking it down that way really helped. He did not have separate rubrics for each of the different phases, but he totally could have. But what he did do was award points based on each of those phases. So he gave students points for just telling him the county name. He gave students points for getting into the technology. So he definitely was like creating a reward via grade for students following along with the phases. So rubric development. This first link is a rubric developer from EKU. So again, you're going to have access to this, but the majority of our rubrics probably look something like this. We have our criteria, and then we have our ratings based on that criteria. I find that this type of rubric is very approachable for students. They're used to seeing this type of rubric. So that being said, I went ahead and created a ChatGPT rubric prompt template based on that type of rubric. Again, you'll have access to this. So you're kind of just inputting your ideas here into this rubric prompt, and ChatGPT will get you a really good start. It can be a lot to sit down in front of 16 blank grids, deciding what am I going to do? What am I going to write all of these? A lot of times it ends up being like a regurgitation of something you've developed previously. So this ChatGPT rubric prompt should help get you a really good start. You're going to paste in your role, probably your course, your task description. So you've already written that. You've already told students, here's your task. You can just put that straight in here. You're going to paste in your objectives. So what are those Bloom's verbs objectives that you've already created? your scoring scale. So how much do you want each category to be worth? What's the total points of the whole assignment? And then what are your different criteria and components? So that can be, presentation skills, that can be content, that can be creativity, whatever it is that you want to assess students utilizing the rubric. If you plug all that in here and send this through ChatGPT, it will create that table for you. It will literally send you a table that you can copy and paste and put into a Word document or put into a Google Doc. And then at least you have a start. So as with all things ChatGPT, you really want to, analyze, reread, check for mistakes, double check, but it'll go ahead and generate a table for you, format it, get everything laid out for you, and then you can kind of just put the finishing touches on it. And again, you want to provide that rubric to students as soon as you're introducing the project. And like I said, you can even have some mini rubrics created for the scaffolding, the phases of that project. Feedback opportunities. So I've already pretty much mentioned this, but you really want to create lots of opportunities for students to tell you what they're working on, so that you can see what they're working on and you can actually give them opportunities to receive feedback from you as the instructor or even as a peer. So my mind is always in pure asynchronous online mode because that's the instructors that I work with most often. So there's a couple of different ways to do this in a purely online environment. You have a lot more opportunity in a face-to-face environment. But in a purely online environment, you're probably going to have students submit something ahead of time using the LMS. And then there's lots of opportunity here too for discussion board. So can you have students write a summary of what they're doing? Can you have students start formulating ideas for what they would like to be doing and put that in the discussion board and open that up for peer review and for people to go back and forth within the own course about their ideas, about what their plans are. And I think that that can be valuable even in a face-to-face class, utilizing the LMS as a discussion board. Say, hey, go ahead and drop your idea for our assessment, or give a short description of what you think you might be doing, and then make sure that you comment on two other people's. So just getting the students engaged, getting them thinking, and having that happen really early on, right? So if you have a 16-week course, having that happen maybe week 3, week 4. If you have an 8-week course, having that happen week 1 or week 2, right? Getting them right in there, starting to talk about that community of inquiry can be really powerful. And I think just getting feedback from peers about hearing, hey, that's a great idea. You inspired me. I'm thinking about this, or, that, like, I haven't thought about this project in that way. I mean, I think that especially when it's a really well-designed authentic assessment, you're going to have lots of students who have lots of different ideas, and hearing from each other can be really powerful. So on that note, consider collaboration. Is it possible for students to work together on this? Even if it's just at the very end of having a peer review, can you have students submit, like I said, an executive summary of what they did and have them work with peers and say, hey, will you review mine and give feedback based on that executive summary? To, having students work in groups or collaborate together in an online environment that can be a little bit more challenging, but totally possible. And finally, well, not finally, one more thing after that, but including reflection. I think that this is the part that we miss out on a lot in education as a whole. I think we really focus on the product and on getting the product out there, getting the test out there, completing the course. And we don't do a whole lot of thinking about reflection. What happened? What did I learn? How am I going to take the mistakes that I saw during the course of this and, work them into the next time I have the course? So like that death part, like that end part of our course or of our assessment, really taking some time for that and working that in as an actual part of, creating an authentic assessment. It matters what the feedback was. It matters what the students' products look like. It matters what their feedback is on the project. So really taking that into account and making sure you're working that into the first time that you roll out one of these assessments in your courses, making a lot of space for reflection, both reflection on your part as the instructor, as the developer of the assessment, and reflection on the student's part. So I included here some frameworks for reflection. And they can be used as an instructor. So you can use these frameworks to reflect on what happened. How did the assessment go? What am I planning on doing next time differently? But you can also provide these frameworks to your students so that they can think about how the assessment went for them. So I really like the 5 R's: reporting, responding, relating, reasoning, reconstructing. Gibbs is good too. What was the description of your experience? What are your feelings and thoughts about the experience? What went right, what went wrong, the evaluation, an analysis of the situation. So how am I going to be using this, moving this forward, and a conclusion, and an action plan. The 4 F's is really simple: facts, feelings, findings, future. I like that. Rolls off the tongue, easy for students to remember. So again, you're going to have access to this, but kind of maybe just picking one of these frameworks, and this can be one of the closing pieces of your course of like, hey, we're going to use this 4F framework to talk about the assessment. What are the facts? What were your feelings about it? What did you find? And now what are you going to do in the future? So again, I think just creating space and bringing awareness to that this part is just as valuable as the beginning, right? Like that reflecting on what happened, reflecting on what went well, reflecting on what students learned, reflecting on what you learned. I feel like that's just as impactful as the beginning stages of planning. So if you don't, if you plan these great learning objectives and you plan this great assessment, and you don't reflect on, well, did we meet the learning objectives? Did students achieve these? Do I feel like students are walking away with the skills that I wanted them to walk away with? Then it's all kind of moot. So I feel like reflection is a really powerful piece that we sometimes just don't have time for either, right? Like it's the end of term, I have things to do, it's graduation or it's winter break, whatever it is. Like I just need to get this done and get this graded. But this reflection piece I think is really, really valuable, especially when you're talking about authenticity. And then evaluating and revising. So if we don't reflect, we really can't get here of like, what should I do differently next time? And also looking at that accessibility piece. And that's kind of the next thing I have here is evaluating your assessment, probably before your assessment ever even gets off the ground, making sure it's accessible to all students, including those with disabilities, and that it fairly evaluates each student's learning. So just keeping that in mind, making sure that your assessment is inclusive and that all students are going to be able to perform to the best of their ability here. And I think that definitely comes back when you're, checking in with students really early on, asking them what potential problems do you see with this, creating this, what are you thinking about? What are you worried about? And hearing them and making adjustments based on that. And then, like I said, review and revise. So I think it's one thing to create an assessment, drop it in a course or give it to your students, let them complete it. You have all these great products, but are you really taking the time to review and revise that assessment based on what you learn each time? Okay. Any thoughts before I talk about my example here? It's okay if there isn't. Let me look at the chat. Okay. Okay, so my exemplar here. So this is Dr. Foster, and we have a great relationship between ID and instructor here. I love that he feels like he can call me up and say, hey, I have an assignment that I'm working on. Can we just talk through it? And I think sometimes that's what instructors need. That's what we need, is just somebody to talk about our idea. Hey, is this crazy if I want to ask students to do this? What do you think? What are the logistics of doing something like this, especially in an online environment? So a lot of times Dr. Foster and I, our conversation are about, how can we move this into an online modality? And even, early on in this semester, I'm working with a mathematics instructor who she actually teaches education mathematics. So like Math 201, which is like getting students prepped to teach math. And we're moving that into an online modality. And so, she's thinking about, hey, I do all of these like very present, things where students work together and use manipulatives. How am I going to move this into an online environment? and just having a conversation. She's like, I just love that I can talk to you about this and we can have a conversation about it and think about it together, think about it out loud. What could this look like in an online environment? And, that's what the IDC is for. That's what we're here for. So, reach out to us if you want to talk through an assignment. But this is the one that I've been referring to. This was for disaster resilience. It's a fully online course. And this project was called the Hazard Mitigation Planning Project. So the goal of this project was to put the learners in the role of a county mitigation planner and say, hey, we want you to create a story map, which is what you see on the right side here. Basically, it's a software that helps learners use maps and text and put them together in a way that kind of tells a story about a place, right? So really interesting software. And if this is like piquing your interest, I would love to tell you more about it. I think it can be used far beyond, a disaster resilience class. I think that this is very relevant to this course, but it could be used in all different kinds of ways. And basically they were meant to create this product that could be sent back to the community leaders of like, hey, here are our community assets. Here's our mitigation strategies. Here's the potential hazards that our county faces. These are the things we need to be thinking about. Here are the maps that demonstrate that. So super cool. I think it's really, really highly relevant. Students get to use a software, the ArcGIS software that they've never used before. They got to use all kinds of FEMA map tools. So FEMA creates all different kinds of maps. Those are the maps that you see here about flooding, tornadoes, earthquakes, all the different fire, all the different kinds of hazards that you might see. And then FEMA also creates maps around like different community aspects, like what are the percentage of people that are 65 and older? What are the percentage of people that don't have a cell phone? And so students were able to look at all of these maps and sort of tell a story about the potential hazards and the potential threats to a particular county, and they got to choose their county. Something else I really liked about this is that he took this project. Originally, it was just a Word document. So he just had students kind of collect this information in a Word document. And he was like, I want to be brave. I want students to use this highly relevant technical tool, this ArcGIS software that they're probably going to be using in their jobs. Oh. Learners gain experience working with industry-specific tools, ArcGIS story maps, FEMA resiliency and planning mapping tool, and the National Risk Index mapping tool. I loved this. He forwarded me an email. It was about a problem. She had a problem with something, but this was also part of the email that he forwarded me. Very sad that this rewarding course has come to a close. The amount of valuable tools I've gained from this class to use in my current job was very pleasantly surprising. Thank you so much for that. And I don't think that there is a higher form of praise, honestly, for an instructor or a project of like, I'm a working professional. I'm taking your course because I'm here to better myself. I want to get my degree. It's relevant to my field. And like, you gave me tools that I can use right now in my field. So even though it was like about a problem and he was forwarding me this email because the other part was like an issue that she had, I was like, hey, I think that is the highest form of praise that you could possibly get in the top half of this email. So I also wanted to share this over here. He laid out the project purpose in the scenario, and then he laid out the tasks. So he was very, very clear about here is the scenario that I'm creating for you, and then here are the tasks that I want you to achieve. And then, so this was kind of like the general overview. And then for each of his 4 phases, he redid the task, like phase 1 tasks, phase 2 tasks, phase 3 tasks. So he was very intentional. It took a lot of planning up front. But with that intentionality, I think that he ended up with some really amazing projects that students were super proud of, that were highly relevant in the field. And students are walking away with like real world experience of being a hazard mitigation expert. And just FYI, I don't know anything about disaster management. I'm from an education field. So like, this is all very interesting to me, but at the end of it, after talking to Dr. Foster and seeing these projects, I feel like I might know something about it. So learners created a final story map product, including an introduction, potential hazards, community assets, exposure analysis, and then the mitigation strategies. So here was his rubric, and this was the only rubric that he gave to students. This was the rubric that students were referring to throughout the 4 phases. I think it's really well written though, and I think it's super clear. It doesn't give it too much instruction or too much. And also I think he left himself a lot of room here. So he really just flipped it between it meets criteria or it does not meet criteria. And then he did it as a point range. So he is, 27 to 45 students could fall somewhere inside of that. 0 to 26 students could fall somewhere inside of that. But really basic criteria: content, organization and appearance, and then their executive summary video. So this is what students were referring to as they went through the project. It was upfront, given to them upfront in that original document. And then something else I really liked that he did was at the end of class, he communicated with the learners a template for describing and citing the project in their portfolio or resume. So I feel like that is kind of one of the best indicators of, is this project an authentic, like an amazing exemplar authentic assessment? Is, can they put this in their portfolio as they move forward into their field? Is this something that they could actually reference and say, hey, I'd love for you to take a look at this. This is something that I've done. So he kind of gave he sent an email at the very end of the course, the very last day, and said, here's a way that you can implement this in your skills section on your resume or CV. And then here's a way that you can put it in your professional work product section. And I love that he even went on to like say, like, here is a template, like, please use this, like, be confident in your work, right? I feel like he's showing another level of confidence there of saying, this is worthy of you showing a potential employer about what you can do. So again, I think that speaks to how genuine and authentic this assessment really was. And then finally, just I guess a little shout out to myself as the ID, or as to the IDC as a whole. But he was super, like, the communication, the flow of communication was open over the whole course of the 8 weeks. I kind of was a support of, like, anytime you want to talk about how this is going, what you want to do, how we could do it better. We did have a couple of like just-in-time videos that we created for the students because it's a purely online course. He was missing that. I don't see these students, so they can't really ask me questions. So I said, hey, let's create a video really quick, 3-minute video, and make sure that students know to look at XYZ. I created a really quick job aid of, here's how you use Microsoft Stream to do your executive video. So it did require, we had to jump in and kind of meet students where they were at and meet their questions. He monitored his virtual office for questions, and then obviously his email, and we kept an open line of communication. And even still, we know that we need to get together and talk about some of the things that didn't go as we planned for the next iteration of this course. So again, whether you teach face-to-face, whether you teach some online, whether you teach purely online, the IDC, we're here. This is what we love to do. This is what I love to do, is talk about these projects and get these projects off the ground, and really just act as a support for you to get these things going in your course, or whatever it is that you do at EKU. So if you feel like you have an idea and you're like, I've wanted to put this into play for so long, but I just feel like I didn't have the resources or I didn't have the support, that's what we're here for. We would love to partner with you and see it all the way through to the end, to the final reflection piece, and how can we make this better for next time. So that's what I have for you today. Again, you're going to get an email with all of those resources. And I think it really just starts with being confident in yourself that, like, you can pull this off, and that you're an expert and you know what your students need to know. And then planning, making sure you have those clear objectives outlined, really thinking carefully about the final product, making sure you have that rubric, and then just being committed to seeing it through to the end, right? That reflection piece, that feedback piece, asking students to give you feedback, having them do some kind of reflection activity, or, even all together say, hey, I did a reflection on how this went. This is what I saw from your all's products or from your all's performances. These are some things I learned from next time. Does anybody have anything to add to this? What did you learn from this that I could implement the next time? And I think too, having students even, reflect on the project, taking a couple of your favorite reflections and sharing them with your next group of students, right? Just constantly feeding that cycle. And of course, with your students' permission, using their projects as, exemplars the next time you run the course, the next time you run the project, saying, hey, here's this student's product, here's what this looks like, here's their video reflection on what they feel like they learned. So I guess just being willing to like see it all the way through its cycles. Yeah, and I think that overall students really enjoy these types of projects much more than they enjoy, taking a final exam. And I know it takes more work up front, but ultimately they can be really powerful experiences. And, these are the types of things that students can remember, 10 years down the line. In fact, if you take a moment and reflect on your education, like, what are the things that you remember doing? Like, what are the assignments that you remember? It's probably the ones that were challenging, but the ones where you really had to deeply integrate yourself in the work. I always, whenever I think about authentic assessment, I always think about my world history class in 10th grade. Our assignment was to create a grid outline of the world and then use that grid, use longitude and latitude to map the entire Earth surface onto this map. And it was so challenging and so time consuming, but it's just one of those things where it really made me think about what does the map look like? What goes into map making? What does the map look like? It's just something that I've remembered for years and years and years. And it was challenging, but I was deeply integrated in it, really cared about my final product, and have carried it with me ever since. So I see some chats, but anybody have anything to add? Any experiences with authentic assessment? Any questions?
I just want to say, and I know that was in the chat too, but it's always good to get a list of resources that you can go back to. So I do appreciate that. And I know there have been a lot of changes in instructional design. So, and people kind of moving around and things. So is there a current list of the instructional designers in the areas that they work with?
Yeah. So if you go to the IDC's website, I think if you just Google EKU IDC, it should bring up everybody who's currently on the team. Right now, we're all very open to working with different departments and different pieces, different people. Thank you, Brooke. Brooke just dropped it in. Brooke is another instructional designer. Brooke is here, and so is Anne. Anne is also an instructional designer. So if you have a specific project, I would reach out to our director, James Morris, and he can kind of get you connected with the person that it makes the most sense to get you connected with. But ultimately, we are a service-oriented department, and our goal is to serve you as an instructor. So we will make it work out. Yeah, just reach out and we'll get it on our calendars.
Okay, thank
Cassie, when will the email go out with the presentation?
So I don't know, you may have sent this to Lisa. Lisa Blue would normally have been doing this one,
Okay.
but she had another conflict, so I'm jumping in for her. So if you've sent her the slides, then we can get those out as early as this afternoon. The
Okay.
recording, what we usually do with the recording, if you want to share, those will be available on YouTube, our YouTube channel, by the end of the week. We usually upload those, or download those on Thursday and then upload those on Friday morning. So, but the email will immediately follow this afternoon.
Awesome. So I think that the University of Chicago, Illinois is the best website. So if you just Google authentic assessment, UIC, you will probably find those really good websites for the brainstorming, for the different kinds of assessments and the different project types. I think that those are the most valuable. So Okay, well, I really appreciate everybody's time here today, and whether you're watching now or watching later, please do reach out to me, embry.jacobs@eku.edu, and I would love to talk about authentic assessments, even if it's just like a Teams chat, a Zoom chat. We can have a cup of coffee and just talk about things. If you have like a larger project in mind, you can get in touch with our director, James Morris, at the IDC.
Thank you, Embry, and thank you everyone for tuning in. Feel free to reach out to fictal@eku.edu if you have other questions, and we hope to see you at the next session.
Thank you. Bye, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.